Hello, my name is Kathy Banks, and I am going to be giving my informative speech today on Charles Pittman Humphrey. Charles Pittman Humphrey is my fiance's father, and the reason why I chose to do my speech on him is because he fought in the Vietnam War from 71 to 72. He is a 66-year-old man. He's married, he has 4 children and 8 grandchildren. He entered the military in 1971, and then later that year they sent him to Saigon, Vietnam. During his stay in Vietnam, he was a part of the Vietnamization program that Nixon implemented. He was a part of the MACV group, which is the Military Assistant Command. The Vietnamization program is a program that implemented the U.S. was supposed to help the South Vietnamese try to gain control of their own military defense. The North Vietnamese, however, attacked, and this was known as the Easter Offense. And this was one of the biggest offenses in the war. It turned the war around. Charles Humphrey lived in North Carolina, Newbern, North Carolina, his whole life. He met his wife in 1970 and married her in 1970. He joined the military a short while after that in 1971, and they quickly sent him to Vietnam. When he upon arriving in Vietnam, they made him get fingerprints. He had to go to the local command to get his fingerprints taken. Once he got there, his fingerprints were smudged, so they couldn't use them. They then sent him to the military police, and those fingerprints were smudged as well, so they couldn't use them. After that, they sent him to the morgue to have those taken because they were usually the most accurate. When he arrived at the morgue, he went into the chapel part. He heard the religious music playing in the background, and he saw soldiers praying. He went into the office and asked the officer where he could be fingerprinted. He instructed him to go to the 3rd bay. This meant that he had to go through the 1st and 2nd bay to get to the 3rd. When he walked into the 1st bay, he smelt the stench of formaldehyde. When he walked into the room, he saw a flag hanging down from the middle of the ceiling, and off to the sides along the wall he saw inclined tables with dead bodies on them. There were legs and arms and pieces of their heads missing. This made him realize that he was actually in war, and he was terrified to keep going. But then he walked into the 2nd room. Once he walked into the 2nd room, he saw a table that had about 40 skulls on the table. These skulls were there from 1968, and they were still waiting to be identified. He then walked into the 3rd room, and this is where he was fingerprinted accurately. In 1972, in the spring, the North Vietnamese began their Easter Offense. They took about 50 Soviet tanks and 300,000 troops, and the U.S. was there to aid the South Vietnamese. They were told to send all their troops out, whether they were cooks, engineers, whatever they did, they had to go and fight. They were given arms, and they were sent to the battlefield, and they were told to do everything they could to defend the grounds. After the North quickly turned back after a couple of weeks, and after they had already left, the South Vietnamese and the U.S. were disabling the tanks, and they found that the North Vietnamese soldiers were actually chained to the controls on the tanks, so they were fighting against their will. They didn't want to fight, and they were made to do so. This was a very unsuccessful event in the military standpoint. Right after this, Mr. Humphrey was given 2 weeks leave. They flew him to Hawaii, and he stayed there for a day, and then they told him he had to figure out his own way home. He flew into California where he had a 2-hour delay. While he was there, he had to change into his civilian clothes to keep people from throwing bags of urine and feces at him. He then, after that, he flew home, and him and his newborn baby went and stayed at Indian Beach for the remainder of his stay. At the end of his stay, they brought him back to Cherry Point to take an embassy flight, and when they were going over a Bombay airport, there was an attack going on. They didn't have any source of weapons or anything with them. One soldier did have a .45 handgun, but that wasn't enough to hold up against the crowd that they were against. They were put on a bus and they were sent to Saigon. Once they got there, he breathed a breath of fresh air and knew that he was safe again. He continued his stay at Saigon until his time was over, and then he went to Germany to continue working on the MAC-V program, and he then could have his family there. In 1975, Nixon resigned and Saigon fell. In conclusion, Mr. Humphrey learned a lot from this, and he really wanted to be a family man, and he wanted to be a stronger man and be there for them. Thank you.